Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I am joined by Elizabeth Lotardo. If that name sounds familiar, it is because she has been a guest back several years ago. She is a consultant, a writer, an online instructor who helps organizations drive emotional engagement. She has a new book out, Leading Yourself, which has been called a refreshingly candid playbook that helps you create a work experience worth loving right now. And that is what we talk a lot about in this, all the different aspects of what it means to lead yourself. Elizabeth works with senior leaders, frontline managers, and entry-level teammates to create more purpose-driven work experiences. Her clients include Salesforce, DraftKings, Hilton, numerous Berkshire Hathaway organizations, LinkedIn, and a number of others. She's also a popular LinkedIn learning instructor who designs workshops on topics like leading without formal authority, finding your purpose at work, and leading yourself. She writes for the Harvard Business Review, and her work has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and on NPR. Really enjoyed this one. I am a nerd for the topic of leading yourself and trying to figure out what that means and how we do it effectively while also positively impacting the people around us. And we talk about that for about an hour here with a lot of some philosophical stuff, but a lot of really practical stuff that people can take and do too. It also reaches both ends of the spectrum, as you'll hear right away in the conversation. It's those people who are really gung-ho and really motivated and intense about leading themselves and how they can do it more effectively. But it's also those people who are like, that sounds like a lot. I'm not that intense. Maybe that's not for me. I just am more go with the flow. Big goals kind of scare me. Like, even if you're on that end of the spectrum, there's a ton in here on how you can just take a little bit of action, a little bit more consistency, just be a little more specific with one or two of your goals and have a big, big impact on your life and or on your work. So love this one. Hope you all enjoy it. Here is, again, Elizabeth Lotardo. Elizabeth, welcome back to the show. I've had a few repeat guests on here, but not many. So I'm excited to have you back. I know you have a new book out, Leading Yourself. And as I was just saying before we hit record, I love the topic of leading yourself. I love whether it's Jocko Willink's extreme ownership or some coaching work I do on building a strong sense of self. Like, I just think having a strong sense of who we are and where we want to go and taking the authority to lead ourselves is just a really powerful mindset to have, even if we're not trying to be a corporate CEO or anything like that. Like, just owning what you're doing and owning the life you're living, I think, can be such a powerful framework for people. So I'm excited to jump in and hear what you have to say about it.
Well, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be here. And I know you're a natural self-leader, and I suspect many of your listeners are as well, people who intrinsically know they're in control of their lives. My job as the author of Leading Yourself is to be a little bit more specific about how we can apply that at work.
Yeah, I would say that I am a natural self-leader, although early on realized that that's a lot harder than you think. And there's a lot of levels to the game. And just because you want to lead yourself doesn't mean you necessarily are going to do everything the right way. So with a lot of fumbles, I have made a lot of progress. And this podcast has been a big help in that, because there's just always more you can learn about being a human being and being a good human being and interacting well with other human beings.
It's a simple concept, but it's not easy to execute all of the time, especially in a rapidly changing environment when, things are getting in our way, like new technology. I think we have this deep aspiration to lead ourselves, but the world trips us up pretty frequently.
Yes. And okay, so we're going to get into that. So let's just talk about, to you, what does it mean to lead yourself?
To me, leading yourself is controlling the controllable. From whatever seat you are in, you are looking at the situation and thinking, what parts of this can I maneuver and how can I make it work for me? It's making that shift from reactive to proactive, from powerless, which we often feel in a less than perfect job, to powerful. And again, it's a simple concept, but it shows up in 1,000 different ways. And those thousands different ways can really transform your work experience.
So right off the bat, I think that can feel daunting for some people.
It can.
Right. Because if you're going to lead yourself, if you're going to take ownership of your life, you have to take ownership of everything. And it's like, with so much out of our control in life, it can feel so overwhelming or even anxiety inducing to think about trying to lead myself and be purposeful in every aspect of my life. And I have to be intentional and I have to be serious. And and all of a sudden it's like, I just want to have fun. I just want to go out on a Friday night. I just what do you say to those people who maybe are like, that's great. I'm not that intense. I'm not that serious. Like, how can they think about leading themselves?
Cool. Me either. I am not super intense and serious in every aspect of my life. Can leading yourself apply to everything you're doing? Yes, but that doesn't mean it has to. You can use leading yourself to change one relationship, like the relationship you have with your boss. You can use leading yourself to get one new job. You could apply it in the micro, and in the case you mentioned, the extreme, the macro, and be this super intentional, all in, ownership driven person. I'm naturally not that person. I don't think many people are in every single area of their life. So leading yourself is, yourself is in the word. You decide what parts of your life you want to apply this to.
Yeah. And I think one of the mistakes that I make naturally is I do try to control a lot in my life, and I try to lead and be purposeful in all these different areas. And what I've actually worked on is letting go in a lot of areas, just walking into my house at night and reacting to the kids and my wife and whatever else is going on, and just being present and being there and not worrying in that moment about leading myself to some higher purpose. It's just let's just show up and be a dad and be a husband and be a human being for a couple hours. And then I can get back to whatever I want to do for myself after that. But I think for those of us that are maybe on the other side of the scale, you got to let go a little bit too.
Yeah. And there's nothing like a toddler to make you realize you are in fact not in control. I have one of those too. And I think that's one of the common conundrums for a high performer, right? We want to maneuver and finesse and optimize every single element of your life. But in reality, we are only in control of our own behavior. And you can choose to view that truth as freeing, which a lot of people do. It's a much more optimistic way to view it, or defeating. And you can look at the world and think, I don't control the economy. I don't control what AI is doing. I don't control what my boss wants. And that can feel really disempowering. But when we shift to what can we control? What can we influence? How can we, in the seat we're in, drive change? That's when things start to get really momentum behind them.
That sounds a lot like Stoicism to me.
I have read The Daily Stoic.
Okay. Do you see commonalities between those two, or do you think of it differently?
There's definitely some commonalities. I mean, I think both of them involve a level of intentionality and introspection. I think leading yourself, at least the book Leading Yourself that I wrote, is certainly geared to be more practical. Like, how can you apply that mindset to goal setting? How can you apply it to your relationship with your manager? How can you apply it to making a less than perfect job feel not soul sucking every day? So if you're there, know that leading yourself, yes, can be like Stoicism and can be really introspective and philosophical. It can also be really practical and looking at these pivotal workplace moments and thinking, how can I influence this from my seat?
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things you talk about early in the book is the concept of purpose and passion. And this is something I've brought up on here a few times before. It's something I struggle with sometimes, and I kind of have to recorrect myself, but there's so much in the world right now, so many external forces talking about doing things you're passionate about and living your best life and being as altruistic as you can be. And everything has to have impact and meaning and purpose. And you sort of got a little different view on that. Can you talk about why it's okay not to be passionate about what we're doing all the time?
Well, I have a little bit of a different view on it, informed by a great researcher, Professor Morton Hansen out of University of California, Berkeley. And what he found was that purpose and passion are two really different things. Purpose is believing the work you do matters, that it has an impact, that it's important. Passion is being super stoked on it, right? You're really excited. You can't wait to dive in. And what this research bared out was having a sense of purpose has a much greater impact on our long-term resilience and on our results than passion does, because purpose is longer lasting. It enables us to get through setbacks. It can be shared, like it's shared. If we're on a team, I share the same purpose as you. And it's also something that is steadfast in the sense that if we run into a roadblock, if things change, we're holding on to that North Star. Passion is a fleeting thing. And to me, this was a relief because a lot of the work that all of us do is tough. It's not super exciting all the time. Like, we're having a great conversation on this podcast. Also involved in this is sending over bios and headshots and editing and making sure the sound is right and things that are a little bit more tedious. Those things we don't have to be passionate about. But when we see the purpose in them, that's when the story we tell ourselves about the work we're doing changes. So to me, focusing on why this work matters is transformative when you consider the passion route is, am I excited about this or not?
So let's talk about purpose then, because I think this topic can get people snagged up too, is like, it can feel like, you know, if I'm not saving lives or saving the planet or saving something, then it's not that purposeful. How can we define purpose for ourselves in a more productive way, more attainable way?
I think you made such an important call out. We have this belief that if you're not a doctor, a teacher, or a firefighter, you are, a slave to the corporate oligarchs and your job is devoid of purpose. And nothing could be further from the truth. If your organization is making something that people are buying, you have a purpose. Otherwise, your company wouldn't exist. The challenge is that purpose gets buried in a crowded inbox. It escapes our field of vision when it's passed to another department, and we lose our sightline to how our work is making a difference. So if you want to get back in touch with that sightline, look at what your customers are saying. Even if you're not in a customer-facing role, even if you're in a business-to-business space that isn't transforming the world, but simply making accounting better, making recruiting easier, whatever it is, put your mind into that impact, and that's what's going to fuel you through change, through setback, and through challenge in a way that passion simply won't. But again, you don't have to be saving the world. There's lots of pieces that make our world go round, and simply doing something that someone else finds valuable is a purpose.
Yeah. So I was working with my coach over the last 2 weeks on just the concept of significance. It had come up, and I'd been doing a lot of writing on significance. Where I've kind of landed is it's really just about impact. Mm-hmm. And I think with purpose, we want to think about the grandest impact we can possibly have, when in reality, impacting one other person is filled with a lot of meaning. And
there's a huge ripple effect.
Really feels good. And so thinking about the way in every moment that we can be impacting our team, our clients, a person we run into in the elevator, like any opportunity that we have to make an impact on other people, even in little ways. For me, if I start to think about it that way, now all the work becomes an opportunity to reinforce purpose. And I think if we narrow the lens a little bit, we can actually find a lot more fulfillment and have an opportunity to reach more people. But I think if we're trying to solve the biggest problems right off the bat, we sort of have it in the wrong order. It's like if we just focus on impacting the small groups of people around us and we do a really good job at that, that has the opportunity to grow into large impact versus just taking one big swing the other way around.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the people, everyone listening, who have been most impactful to you. Was it the president of the United States? Probably not. It's probably the people who are in your community. It's a really supportive boss you had. It's a parent you had. It's people who showed up for you when you really needed it. And those are the opportunities that we often miss when we think about purpose. We think about it as, I'm going to cure this major disease. I'm going to make this massive dent in the world, when the dent you're making in the world could be the friend you lent an ear to when they needed it. It could be the person you're raising. There's lots of ways that purpose shows up that aren't these gigantic gestures that the movies and these aspirational books paint purpose to be.
Yeah, I love that. Related, I think, is probably my favorite line from the book. And it was, I quote, "Most goals depend on consistency, not intensity."
Yes.
I'll say that again. Most goals depend on consistency, not intensity. Please explain.
Well, if you're anything like me, you've been tripped up by intensity. And this is directly related to what we were talking about with purpose. We set these hugely intense goals. Like we're going to be 40 under 40, the Forbes list. You set that goal when you're 35. That's not a long time to reach that goal. And the intensity is going to absolutely burn you out. When in reality, most goals depend on consistency, that consistent effort, showing up every single day. If the goal's too big, if the intensity is too high, we're never going to get there. We're going to burn ourselves out along the way. But setting these attainable goals that you show up for every day, that's where meaningful change starts to happen. And it's a lot less exciting to say that instead of I'm going to be, CEO by the time I'm 40, to say, I'm going to make sure I show up to all my one-on-ones really prepared, right? The CEO by the time you're 40 is a lot more exciting, but it's too intense. You're not going to get there. Yeah. Showing up to your one-on-ones prepared consistently over time, it increases the odds you're going to be that CEO by 40, but it's going to make a more significant impact in your career, and it's going to be easier to stick to.
Yeah. And I think it's going back to the people I was talking about in the beginning who maybe are scared to set goals because they're like, doesn't feel natural to me to set those big goals, and maybe there's something wrong with me, and I'm just gonna kind of go about my business. Like, I think this is an empowering thing for them too. It's like, you don't need to set some crazy goal. You just need to set some consistent habits.
Yeah.
And like, what are the things that you can show up and do consistently? And if you do that, those things compound in a big, big way. Like it's no secret on here, I like to write. You've obviously written books. Like, nobody sits down and writes a book in one sitting.
No.
Right? It's impossible. And the novels that I have written have taken 2 years each. And like, it's just about sitting down and showing up on a consistent basis. That's what Stephen Pressfield talks about in The War of Art. Like, anybody trying to do anything has to view themselves as a pro. And what do pros do? They show up every day. And it's such a powerful concept that we miss so often.
And I'm sure you had moments in your writing journey, I certainly did, that were really hard, where your passion was not there, where you look at what you wrote yesterday and you don't like it anymore. And by all measures, your word count is less today than it was the day before, and you seem to be going backwards. And if you're passionate about writing, that moment is going to suck way more than if you think there's a purpose to what I'm going to do. I'm going to push through it.
Yeah. I have heard two different athletes, an Olympian and a guy who won the CrossFit Games like 4 or 5 years in a row. But they were both talking about the same concept, which is, if you're doing something meaningful, it will be broken out. Your experience will be broken down into thirds. About a third of the time, it's going to be great. About a third of the time, it's going to be terrible. And about a third of the time, it's going to be kind of average. And as long as your experience kind of falls roughly within those ranges, you're moving in the right direction. Because if you're trying to push yourself to do anything meaningful, like, it's going to be a slog some part of the time. If it's a slog all the time, you've probably bit off more than you can chew. But it should be a slog at least a third of the time. Counter to that, like, you should enjoy it at a third of the time. You should show up with energy and feel good about what you're doing about a third of the time. And then the rest is just like kind of filling in the middle. And I thought that was just a great way to think about performance and like getting through that consistency.
And let's tie it back to goals. There's some research from Dr. Ruth Goethe, and I referenced in my book, about Olympians and what fuels them. She interviewed tons of Olympians and astronauts and Nobel Peace Prize winners, these definably really high achievers. And she would ask all these Olympians, oh, can you show me your medal, right? Like, You must be really proud. You worked your whole career to win this medal. And almost all of them were like, oh, it's under my bed, or it's in my sock drawer, or I think it's in this storage box. And what she found was it was never about the medal. It was always about the journey to it. And when we think back to goals depending on consistency instead of intensity, yes, they wanted to win gold, but the consistency and the journey and the path that got them there was the real focus, not that end result. And I think that lesson can be taken to so many of us in our very normal careers, right? We're not Olympic athletes. We may have these big aspirational goals, but when we hold our breath and we wait to achieve them and we don't focus on what's right in front of us, we not only cost ourselves a lot of personal happiness and we miss out on a lot of joy, we are less likely to achieve that thing that we actually want when we focus too much on the outcome and less on the journey.
Yeah. I actually have a friend who won some world championship in Olympic medals in ice hockey. And I went to her house and the question came up where, like, can we see your medals? And she had to go to her trunk to dig them out of a paper bag. So I was laughing when I was reading that part of the book because I was like, yes, I have seen that in action. That is actually true in my experience. So let's talk about that then for a second, because I think my second favorite part of the book, if consistency over intensity was the first, my second favorite part of the book was talking about success not being as gratifying as we think it's going to be.
Yeah.
Can you explain that for people?
So I have a background in sales. I've even been in sales too.
Yep.
There's a feeling that happens when you meet your quota in sales. You feel awesome for 5 minutes. And the same plays out with a lot of functions. When you launch a product, you feel great for a day. When you finally onboard that new candidate that you've been trying to win over, you feel amazing until you don't. These goals and the feeling that comes with achieving them is a fleeting feeling. And when we tie ourselves too much to that end post, especially when the end post, like in sales, moves again the next year, there's always another one right afterwards. You're holding your breath knowing that you're starting from zero in that case. We cost ourselves a lot. So when we think about not over attaching to that endpoint and focusing on what is right in front of us, that enables us to be more resilient in the long term instead of feeling like, oh, I just hit my quota and now I have to do it over again with an even bigger number. When we focus on the input, the journey, what's in our control to get there, that's when we really start to take off.
So are you saying that those goals and that success doesn't matter?
Not that it doesn't matter. I mean, it certainly matters. If you're in sales, you want to hit your goal and meet your comp plan, right? But those are moments that feel good. They're not moments that will fuel us in the long term. It is never as sweet as we think it is to hit a goal. The feeling of waking up the next day after you hit a really big number, you feel almost exactly the same. So when we over-attach ourselves to these big goals and we say, everything's going to be right when I hit this target, when I check this major milestone off my list, when I get this next job, and then it happens and we feel really the same as we did before, it's scary. But when we're focused on the input, what's in our control, how are we leading ourselves to get there, we have momentum behind us to when we get there, feeling energized instead of drained and scared about the next one.
Yeah. So how do we do that, right? Because if we're kind of all or nothing animals in a lot of ways. We've all heard the goalpost always moves. It's if you're just focused on the goal, you're never going to be happy. Jim Carrey talks a lot about that. If anybody's like seen his clips over the last couple of years talking about success, but it's always somebody who's like achieved success, who's like success doesn't matter. And it's like,
easy for you to say.
Easy for you to say.
Money can't buy happiness.
It's easier to say when you have a lot of money. So how do we think about these two? I've had a guest on the show, Brian Emerson, who was talking about polarities and how we naturally get wrapped around one polarity, not like, it's all about achievement, or no, it's just about experience. As he talked about, and I believe, it's how do we navigate between the polarity? How do we still set goals and achieve and grow and succeed, but manage our energy in a better way?
So there's a shift I talk about in the book that can help you manage that polarity. And I love that phraseology. And it's shifting from output goals to input goals. So often we are handed output goals at work. You're going to meet this metric, this turnaround time, this revenue target, whatever it is, this output. The challenge is we don't control all the things that go into achieving or not achieving that output, right? Let's go back to the sales example. You can do all of your pre-call homework. You can make so many sales calls. You can have great negotiating skills. If your product has a major failure, you're probably not going to hit your target. If your industry gets turned upside down by some new technology, you're probably not going to hit your target. And so when we have these exclusively output-based goals, and we're not really focused on the inputs and all these other factors, we're not only holding our breath hoping that we meet them, we feel completely powerless when we do. When we shift from an output-based goal to an input-based goal, we put ourselves in the driver's seat. And that's where we start to get energy. So in this sales example, an output-based goal is a revenue target, right? There's tons of things that go into achieving or not achieving that revenue target. Input-based goals, what's in your control? You can make 15 outbound sales calls every day. You can follow up with all your customers within 48 hours. You can make sure you role play with your boss your most important sales conversations every week. Those things that are within your control, that you're not worried something else is going to impact, you know you can do them. That's what gives you energy. So when we think about moving the goalpost and how that feeling can be really defeating, that's because the goalpost is often an output-based goal. And we know we did our part, but so many other things had to go right. And then we're thinking, are they going to go right again? Are they not going to go right again? I kind of feel like I got lucky. When we shift to input-based goals, we know that we're in the driver's seat and that we're in control of what we're doing. It drastically increases the likelihood we're going to get to that output-based goal, but it doesn't guarantee it.
Yeah. I would make the case that the two should be connected, right? Like,
of course.
Like, let's create a bunch of input-based goals that lead us towards our output-based goal. And then if we miss our output-based goal, you could do an after-action review or some kind of assessment to say why. Okay, the market turned upside down. Some new competitor came in and totally changed the way that this is being done. And we need to, we didn't have time to pivot. Like, there are external forces. Okay,
of course.
Great. Let's solve those problems. Or my inputs weren't good enough. I set a sales goal of meeting with 2 new companies every month, and I really need to be doing 6, right, to get the volume. So I think that if you tie the two together, you can kind of always be looking back and forth between the two. Like, hey, are these putting me on the path to success? Because the outcomes do matter in our world. Winning does matter in a lot of ways. But if we're only focused on the winning, we don't win. And I think there's so many examples of that. You can read any sports book about any championship team. Like, if you're just focusing on the championship, you're not going to win the championship. You have to focus on these things, but they have to be directed at the championship. Right.
You focus on your strength training, your conditioning, your practice, your nutrition, all of these things that we know drastically influence the outcome, but are within your control.
And then you play the game and you see, did the things we did to prepare win the game? And if they didn't, then you got to go back and you got to do new inputs. And so you're kind of always going back and forth between the two. And I think that's what can help you really drive success.
And there's a subtle reason, a subtle benefit why you want to do this in the corporate world too, right? Your input is the only thing that is within your control. If your manager hands you an output, you need to be having the conversation with them about all of the behaviors, all of the tasks, all the things you're going to do to achieve that output. So even if there is an external force, like you said, a new competitor, new technology, some unforeseen thing that makes us not achieve the output, you can hang your hat on the fact that you did the input. It enables you to say, well, it's not my fault, without sounding like a total complainer to your boss.
Yeah. Give an example of that's not sales.
An example that's not sales.
Like maybe a service example.
Let me give you an IT example, as just about the opposite of sales. So
great.
I was working with a client who is head of IT. And her boss said that they wanted her to have a 100% first call resolution rate. A first call resolution rate in IT is when someone in the organization calls to IT and says, I have this gigantic problem. IT fixes it on the first call. In her mind, she's like, there is absolutely no way that is achievable.
Yeah. Have you ever used technology?
Right.
That's not how it
Have
works.
you ever had a technology problem? We have things that are connected to outside vendors. Sometimes we have to work with them to solve the problem. We have these softwares that we don't own, and sometimes they have a problem. We can't control it. So in her mind, she's like, you've handed me this insane output. The conversation she had with her boss is, what can I do to improve my likelihood that I'm going to reach a higher first call resolution rate? I'm going to make sure that my team, the team answering the calls, has really accessible resources, that they're not looking to me to solve every problem. We have a good IT library with tools, with quick fixes, people calling for things like, I'm locked out of my email. They know how to fix that right on the first call. So I'm going to increase their level of resources that they have at their fingertips. I'm also going to make sure our team is going to trainings, right? We're going to upskill ourselves in all the softwares we're using. We're going to make sure our continuing education is right on track. Tons of other things she can do that are within her control are going to increase the likelihood the first call resolution rate is going to improve. Instead of going to her manager and saying, that is a completely unrealistic goal, don't give that to me, which is not a good look. Or instead of saying, okay, and a year later being like, oh, surprise, like I didn't do it because it was actually unrealistic. She took the ownership to say, okay, what are the inputs I can do to drastically increase the likelihood I come somewhere close to this target? Got her manager's agreement on that, and her performance review went way better because of it.
I love that example. Yeah, that's great, because I think a lot of people are afraid to have those conversations because it can come off like you're not wanting to do the work. But I think if you're framing it from a performance angle and you're framing it from, hey, help me break this down into the component parts, it feels more collaborative.
It proves that you do, in fact, want to do the work. You're not pushing back on the number and saying, I don't want to do this. You're not blindly agreeing and being like, well, in 12 months, I'll have to explain why that was dumb. Instead, you're breaking it down and saying, what are the 10 small steps that I'm going to focus on to help me come close to this? And that conversation with your manager shows so much more than either deflecting, it's not my fault, or blindly agreeing, sure, whatever, cross that bridge when we get there, which are the tempting short-term talk tracks that are pulling us when we don't want to leave ourselves. Yeah.
So let's get into bosses and working with others, because we've been talking a lot about what we can control. Let's talk about the people we can't control.
Yeah,
so I like your concept. You talk about every human being has idiosyncrasies. And just because somebody has idiosyncrasies, it doesn't mean they're a bad person or a bad boss. So how can we reframe our thoughts around working with other people, their intent, their personalities, that kind of thing?
I think culturally, we have built up the role of boss to be way too high. Your boss is a person. They have their own challenges. They have their own boss. They have their own working style. They have their own annoyances, just like you do. They're going to rub you the wrong way sometimes, just like you are going to rub them the wrong way sometimes. And I think accepting that, especially early in your career, is powerful, because instead of looking to your boss to be the answer to all your questions, this guiding force in your career, this amazing mentor, this super knowledgeable, super understanding, super empathetic, super emotionally intelligent figure, they're just a person. They want the best for you, probably, but it's your job to build a relationship that serves both of you.
So how do we do that?
So how do you build a better relationship with your boss? First, clear expectations. So much workplace angst stems from unclear and unspoken expectations. If you are assuming that your boss should be a mentor for you in career growth, you haven't said it, and then they're not a mentor for you in career growth, you're upset. When in reality, if you had said it, They very well could have been a mentor to you in career growth. So the first thing to build a better relationship with your boss is to be really clear about what you want and what you need from them and have that conversation with them. Again, not from a place of you owe me this, but in terms of our relationship, here's where I think we can go. Here's what I think would be most helpful from you. Most bosses want to be supportive of you. It's your job to show them how.
Yeah. That again, back to performance. If you focus it on performance, hey, here's how I think I could be my best is if I get support from you in these ways. Can we build that into our one-on-ones? One, that shows that you're taking initiative. Two, it shows you're a critical thinker. Three, it shows you're an engaged employee, right? Like people want to help people like that.
Of course they do. And there's a saying, a closed mouth never gets fed. The same is true at work with things like growth opportunities, leadership support. You have to be asking. So rarely will it be just offered to you. Yeah.
And it's got to be real. It can't just be, oh, I want you to develop me and help me get blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's got to be specific and it's got to be real. Hey, I've thought about this. And one of the things I want to get better at is being able to answer the easy questions right off the bat when somebody calls into our IT department. Like, can we talk about the ways that I'm doing that work and get some coaching from you on our internal resources and how I can do that? Because I want to hold myself accountable to being good at that first off the bat. Those types of things.
I'm going to love that.
Yeah. So if you're thoughtful about your own weakness, I think we're also afraid to admit our own weaknesses. But if you can be thoughtful about them and say, hey, the thing I want to improve over the next 6 months is this. Can you help me? I mean, bosses would be drooling all over themselves to have more people like that.
And if they're not, that's a sign for you. And it's best you know now rather than later.
True. That is a good point. That is a good point. Can you talk, because you talk in the book about this, can you talk about how to know when a situation is repairable versus when it's not repairable? Because there are so many times where it's like, hey, hang in there. There are things you can do, like change your attitude, change your approach. This is life. Life's messy. Suck it up and deal with it. Mm-hmm. And then there are points where it's like, honey, you need a new job. Get out from under that terrible boss. You know, like.
And sometimes your spouse sees it before you do.
Yeah. Well, it's very often people out on the outside will see it because you can't see the stress that you're living in. But I have experienced both, and I know many people that I have seen go through both. How do you define for somebody when they should be engaging in one tactic versus the other?
So there's a big chart in the book that goes through examples of annoying workplace behaviors that are inevitable grievances in every workplace, really garbage things that have a short lifespan if you're going to put up with them, and absolute workplace abuse. So there's a million examples for each category, but I think the umbrella message is this: look at the intent. Look at the intent of your boss. Look at the intent of the decision. Look at the intent of the people around you. Are they actively trying to do good work, actively trying to lead the company in a positive direction? Even if it's a decision you disagree with, is their intent positive? And that will help you determine, is this just, misalignment? Is this something I need to work on in the way I communicate? Is this something that's maneuverable for me? Or is this absolutely garbage that I need to move away from?
Okay. At the same time, you talk in the book about how we often misinterpret intent.
We do often misinterpret intent. That's the bugaboo.
So can you expand a little bit more on intent and how we navigate the polarity there too?
I'll tell you why we misinterpret intent. The common way it plays out in corporate is someone at a level 3 or 4 above us makes a decision that they believe is right for the company. They don't communicate why they made that decision, the context of that decision, the alternative decisions, and why they wouldn't work. They communicate the output. As that output goes through the organization, it gets more and more tactical. It gets further removed from the true intent that started it all. And all that lands on your desk is, hey, you need to redo this thing that you did. Or, hey, you need to do this other work that, oh, by the way, you're not going to get paid anymore for. Or, hey, you need to do this really tactical thing that's annoying and you don't want to do. That's all that lands on our desk. So when that's all that lands on our desk, it's easy to think the intent of the people above us is to make our lives harder, to make things more difficult, to make sure we don't go home on time. But it is our job to ask questions and search for the true intent behind that. Very rarely are decisions made because someone wants to create more work and headaches for someone else. We need to search for the good intentions in the sometimes annoying things that land in our inbox or on our desk.
Yeah. I've heard, I think Tim Ferriss say, I might get this wrong, but I've heard him say on his podcast a bunch of times, don't attribute to bad intent what could be attributed to laziness or misinformation. So often people are just like, yeah, I don't know, let's go this route, or it seems like it's this, or God, I don't have time for that, let's just do it this way.
Yeah, and they could very well be making the wrong decision because they don't have the information you have, because they didn't think about it as much as you did. That's really different than making a decision because they hate you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or even because they don't care about you. Like, They can care about you and still give you work that you think they shouldn't be giving you.
Yeah. Have you ever thought, or I was going to draw an example to your spouse. I cannot be the only one who cares deeply about my spouse, but sometimes shows up as a lazy self to the relationship, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
It happens in our personal lives. It happens at work. But when you see the true intention of this is a person who's trying to do the best that they can, you move yourself from a place of anger and resentment into a place of tactical maneuvering on how are we going to work with this decision? How are we going to make a different decision? It becomes a lot less personal.
Yeah. And I think this is an important point to remember, too, when we start to lead other people, or even just when we're working with a lot of peers on a group project of some kind, because we're inevitably going to make decisions or put in work product that somebody else is not going to appreciate. And the more we can be clear and communicating our intent, the smoother the process is going to be and the easier it is for somebody else to bring feedback or, interpret it the right way.
Absolutely. So much of our angst is assuming that other people don't care as much as we do, assuming that they don't want to do the right thing for the company. And when we remove ourselves from that place of assuming and know, what, the only thing I control, back to leading yourself, is my own mindset, my own behavior, the way I'm showing up for this. And I'm going to search for the positive intent in other people. That changes everything for them, but it also changes everything for you, because you don't want to be sitting in resentment and anger every day at work.
We all know what happens when we assume.
Yeah.
Makes an ass out of you and me.
Curse on your podcast. Okay, there you go. You
I'll say it. There's another related point to this that I really liked, where you talk about disagree and commit. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Disagree and commit is a leadership practice that originates from Amazon. And what I share in the book is how I watched that practice play out at LinkedIn, which is an organization I do a lot of work with. And the practice is, you can disagree with a decision. You can actively voice your disagreement. You can beat it up. But at the end of that process, you must commit to it. And we've all seen what happens when we don't commit to a decision. We wait, we cross our arms, we'll see how it goes, we don't lean into it, and then what happens? Either the decision was right and you were wrong and you look pretty silly for sitting on the sidelines this whole time, or the decision fails. Even if it fails and you were holding your breath, no one's gonna be like, oh, you were right all along, you sure told us, wow. We hardly ever get that moment. Yeah. We cost ourselves so much when we don't commit to things. If you voice your disagreement and the decision doesn't land where you wanted it to, you're only costing yourself when you keep holding your breath.
I love that. And yeah, it's just such a good reminder. Like, you don't have to agree with everything to show up and do good work and help move the mission forward. Like, just because you don't agree with something doesn't mean you have to quit.
Yeah, you're not going to agree with 100% of decisions your organization makes. I wish that is a lesson I learned earlier in my career. That doesn't mean they're the wrong decisions. It could be. It doesn't necessarily. But when you hold your breath waiting to be proven right, you cost yourself and everyone around you.
Yeah. I think this is true too with just people who have different points of view than we do. I was invited to a breakfast yesterday where I listened to the CEO of Sherm speak for about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he talked about was, I think it was 40% of Gen Z that they surveyed somewhere said that they would quit a job they liked if they disagreed with the CEO's politics or social views. And I think I've heard with other podcast guests and just other people talking about sort of culture and state of work that, and especially in an election year, that there's a lot more political disagreement happening in the workplace impacting work. And I think whether it's political, social, religious, whatever, so much of what makes our society great is our ability to be with other people and collaborate with other people that we don't agree with on everything. And so I think this disagree and commit can be really powerful.
That's an interesting statistic. I think there's a huge spectrum of like disagree with social issues. Like, do we disagree on how much taxes rich people should be paying? Or do we disagree that some people have rights and others don't, right? Like there's a huge spectrum of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable to disagree on. But back to our comment on intent. Look for the intent behind the decision and behind the viewpoint. Are they having this different view than you because they want the world to burn and they want no one to have opportunities? Probably not. They probably want to create a world where people do have opportunities, right? The path they think to get there might be different than the path you view to get there, but the intent is not malicious in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And this goes back to the polarities conversation I had where I asked him about some political issues, which I have never done on the podcast, but in the sense of like, let's talk about the two poles. And what he had said is, when it comes to a political issue or a social issue, we think that the issue is the pole, and it's not. There are underlying values to those issues that become the pole. So the example he used was gun regulation. And he said, you have one side that thinks we should do away with guns, and you have one side that's like, don't take my guns, and we think it's about the guns, but it's not. On the one side, the people who want to do away with guns, it's about safety and security. The people on the other side, it's about freedom. And those are two things I think we all agree we want both of.
Yes.
Like we all want to feel safe and secure in our home, in our community, in our country, and we all want to feel free to live lives and express ourselves in the way that we want to without oppression. So we want to achieve both, but people get so wrapped around those poles that they can't see that the other person is coming from that value. And I think that translates to the workplace too. Like when you get to intent, when you see somebody saying, we're going to take the company in this direction, like it's because they have an underlying value or they have an underlying belief system that they're trying to achieve or align with. Or if they say we're going to do this culturally, it's because they believe something. There's some value there. And if you can figure out what that value is, and you can figure out what your value is, not your anti-position, but your, the other value pole, then you can have more collaborative conversations about it.
Well, and politics, much like business, sometimes there's no great decision to be made.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
Well, sometimes a decision is going to be imperfect. Like in politics, there are two candidates. No one agrees with one of them on 100% of things. Much like in business, you may be looking at this market versus that market. There's no perfect choice. And to recognize the fact that decisions are made imperfectly is a freeing thing because it divorces you from the notion that these people who make a decision you disagree with have it out for you, don't care, aren't informed. They're doing the best they can with sometimes not great choices.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Before we get too deep into the political realm, I want to talk about teams for a second, because your book is called Leading Yourself, but you also make the case on the power of teams. So we have a tendency, a lot of us have a tendency to lone wolf it, right? Like I can bear this burden. I can take on this workload. I'm worthy and capable. And if I can't do this, then I'm not worthy and capable on my own. For somebody who's really leading themselves well, how do you think about team?
Well, you really spoke to the problem of people self-isolating. And the title of my book, Leading Yourself, is born because I look at every situation as how can I be in charge of this and lead myself through it. So the team element of it is something that I had to really study and learn. And how can we have this intersection between owning our role, leading ourselves, being intentional with our direction, and also working nice with the people around us and making sure we're getting the best out of them too. So leading yourself and working in a team are not mutually exclusive. When you're leading yourself, that ripples out to the team that you're working with. So much about leading yourself is setting a clear direction. When you set a clear direction in a team, you're all united and more powerful and more creative for it. So much of leading yourself is about focusing on inputs, what's in your control, instead of outputs, what is sometimes out of your control. When you do that from a team perspective and you all agree, you're in control of this, you're in control of this, I'm in control of this, you're in control of this, instead of we're all trying to hopefully achieve this thing, we become more powerful, even though we are a group instead of an individual. So I think so many of these practices of mindset, of behavior, of building relationships, yes, they start with us, but they have a ripple effect to the people around us. And when we lead from the seat we're in, even if that's a seat without formal authority, we change the game for everyone we're working with.
Yeah, I love that. That is something I have had to learn in my career too, because I take a lot of pride in being able to take on a lot and bear a big load and be successful on my own. But I'm more successful when I think of it as a team endeavor, and it actually becomes more fun too.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been doing this job for 15 years at Lockton. It's a high pressure sales job. And, I enjoy the camaraderie with my fellow producers and our teams and all of that. But I've gotten to a point where this year I hired a team member just to help me, and calling her my sales coordinator. And she's helping me drum up new opportunities, meet new people, manage my network, all that kind of stuff. And what I found was, like, while it was nice to get all that help and really relieving to have that burden taken off of me, it's actually really fun too. Like, I'll set a meeting with a new company we haven't met with before, and I'll walk out and like high five her, or she'll set one and she's super excited and that gets me super excited. Now I want to go set more meetings with more people. And like, that's only making me more successful, but it's also making it a lot more fun to have somebody to do it with. So I think for any lone wolves out there, if you can lean into that, it doesn't mean you can't still do a lot of work, but if you can lean into that team aspect of it and give it a try, it can be very powerful. It's the whole, you can go fast alone, but you can go farther together.
Good expression. I mean, we're not made to live in isolation. I did write a book, Leading Yourself, but that doesn't mean you're on an island as party of one forever. We depend on each other. We gather in fellowship, we live in families, we work in communities. So much of our success is intertwined. We literally can't survive on our own in the wild, or in many cases in the world of corporate. So leaning into the people around you, knowing that, yes, you are only in control of yourself, your own behavior, your own mindset, but you can have an impact on other people and they can have an impact on you too. And letting that happen is a powerful thing.
So at the beginning of this conversation, you said the world tries really hard to trip you up. And I wrote that down, and I want to circle back to it because this is all great. And in a vacuum, I love everything that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then there's social media, and then there's media in general, and everybody's trying to skew us to some belief or wrap us around some pole or get us motivated about some issue or have us feel bad about who we are. There's just all this noise out there pulling on our attention, pulling on our emotions. How do we protect ourselves against that so that we can remain true to who we are? We can remain consistent with our behaviors, with our input, all that kind of stuff.
Put down your phone. Or limit the time you spend on social media. It sounds so simple, but we are giving a really significant seat at the table of our lives to people who don't deserve it via our cell phone. And when you put it down, you tell the people in front of you, yes, a gazillion people on the world could be feeding information to me right now, but I'm choosing you. So when we are in control, back to leading yourself, of what's coming at us, you're never going to control everything. But when we're in control of, here are the voices I'm letting into my sphere, here are the things I care about these opinions, but not these, we really start to change how the world around us feels. It's tempting to think that we don't have control, but we actually do. And so much of it lies in the palm of our hand with our cell phone, which is something I'm working on, is divorcing myself from Instagram.
Yes, I'm working on divorcing myself from my cell phone in general.
Yeah.
Because what I find can happen is, even without Instagram, I'm looking at a game app or the Redfin app, looking at random properties I'm not going to buy. I'm looking like,
I'm a Zillow stalker. Yeah, but
yeah, like there's just so much on there.
It's never ending.
Could be a distraction, and it's so easy to do the distraction. But I agree. I mean, it's amazing how it just comes down to simple stuff. Like you mentioned simple, not easy. And you mentioned consistency, not intensity. And it's just like, if we put better food in our mouth, if we move our body more, and if we put down our damn cell phones, life gets a lot better for us.
Yeah, it is transformative the way those three things will impact your life. And you're in control the vast majority of the time of those three things. Is it going to be perfect every time? No. But again, consistency, not intensity. The way you show up for yourself, the way you lead yourself, is the first determining factor in how your life turns out. And we leave it to chance so often. Yeah.
Yeah. And back to the consistency thing, allowing ourselves longer time to achieve our goals, I think, can be impactful. We want to lose weight. We decide, I want to lose weight, and we need 20 pounds to be off our body in 2 weeks.
And it says every grocery store magazine cover ever.
Yeah. And it's like, what if we lost 20 pounds over 2 years? I heard somebody say the other day, you get healthy the same way you get sick. Meaning, if you get sick over time, like if you're just slowly putting on weight, you're not just going to drop all that weight and keep it off. You have to create little tweaks, consistency, so that the weight slowly comes off over time, because that's what's going to be sustainable.
And the same is true in the workplace. So often we think, I'm going to get this new job and my whole life is going to be better, when you're showing up as the same person to that new job.
Yeah.
Or we think, if I only had a better boss, if I didn't have this stupid project on my plate, then everything would be better. But it is those smaller habits where we may get a slightly better job, and then another slightly better job, and then maybe a pretty good job. And over time, we really start to make inroads, and we get really burnt out when the first step doesn't pay off how we want.
Yeah. Or we want to jump within a year to the account executive level. And it's like, no. There's a lot of skills you got to build up. And if you can take 3 years to get there, you're going to kick ass in that role. Versus if you take 6 months to get there, and now you're going to be on a performance improvement plan.
Yeah. Play the long game. That's another great book by Dory Clark.
Oh, there you go. Yes. Playing the long game, I think, can be really, really impactful. And what is it? We grossly overestimate what we can get done in a day and grossly underestimate what we can get done in a year.
That's it. And to tie it back to where we first started this conversation, can leading yourself be transformative when you apply it to every single relationship and every single thing you're doing and all of your habits? Yes, of course it can. It can also make a big difference when you apply it to a small thing. Just the relationship you have with your boss. How can you show up for that in a better way? Just the way you think about your work. How can you tap into the impact you're making, even if it feels transactional on your computer? Just the way you work with the people around you. How can you point everyone towards the same direction and focus on input instead of crossing your fingers for output? These small shifts add up to make a transformative impact, but you only have to do one little one to start with.
Yeah. All right. Last question for you. How has this showed up in your world since writing the book?
So I wrote pretty transparently in the conclusion of the book that I signed the book deal for Leading Yourself when I was 4 months postpartum with my most recent son. And I was super sleep deprived, and because of it, super depressed. And the way it showed up for me was, like any good author, I started my writing journey with reading a ton and doing a ton of research and conducting a ton of interviews. And through that process, I started to re-experience myself and capture with new clarity the power of mindset and intention and showing up in the way we want to be in the world. And as I started to re-practice some of those things and add new habits and new layers of skill onto it, I saw my own motivation change. I saw my own physical fitness change. I saw the way I looked at my life start to change. And yes, there are things for postpartum depression, for all types of depression, like therapy and medication. Those things can be really powerful, but so much of the power is within our hands. And when we focus on how can I lead myself through this, that's when everything starts to change. So I like to think I was a really powerful self-leader, and then I was not powerful at all for a season of my life. And I came back even stronger through the research and through the help of the people who wrote this book with me.
Yeah, I love that comment about different seasons of your life, because there are times where you're going to be really great at this and where you're not, and that's okay. And there are going to be times where you can be really intense, and there are times where you're going to take your foot off the gas. And I think we can give ourselves some grace there too.
For sure. And if you're in a job that's not your favorite right now, if you're feeling a little uneasy with all of this new technology, with an uncertain economy, that's okay. This is a season. But the way you show up for yourself in this season is going to determine the next season you're living in. So take the ownership and look at what you can control instead of dwelling on what you can't.
Hell yeah. Let's go. That's a great spot to end it. Elizabeth, this has been a really fun conversation, and I think really helpful for people. And I know we talked a lot about the book, but there's a lot more in the book. So I would encourage people listening to go get the book, Leading Yourself. It is a really good read. It's broken down really easily into different sections on this, your mindset, your actions, dealing with others, that kind of thing. There's a lot more on your own learning and development, making yourself invaluable versus indispensable. There's just a bunch of really good stuff in there for people. So encourage people to go listen there. Elizabeth, anything else you want to close with?
The power is always in your hands, even if you're up against an imperfect boss, a weird economy, or an organization that's not your favorite. You're in control, even when it doesn't feel like it.
You heard it here. Good luck, everybody.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.